Hi, so today I'll be teaching you techniques for painting with watercolors. To give you a little bit of background information, watercolor is a very old style of art that can be traced back to cave paintings in Egyptian times. Here you'll see some examples of watercolor paintings. These were painted by Kate Parr, an illustrator who paints a lot of figures using pastel colors. These are landscapes done by Tony Connor. Most artists who use watercolors paint landscapes or things found in nature. Basically, watercolors are paints that are water soluble, and because it is mixed with water for use, most times they are transparent in color. In modern days, watercolors are sold in two forms, tubes or pans. The watercolor in tubes has a consistency of toothpaste, while the watercolors in pans are dry blocks of paint. Today, I will be using watercolor from a pan, and I'll be showing you 4 different techniques that you can use when painting with watercolors. The materials you need for watercolor painting are a cup of water, paintbrushes, paper. I used watercolor paper. If you use thinner paper or computer paper, it may change the shade or it may rip, so it's best to use thicker paper. You'll need your watercolor, this is my pan, and a napkin to dab your brush on. So today I'll be teaching you 4 different watercolor techniques: variegated wash, glazing, wet into wet, and flat wash. I just cut these out into 4 different squares and drew an outline so I can give you a sample of what it will look like. So the first technique I'm going to teach you is called a flat wash. This is a very basic technique that helps the paint blend so that you don't see the paintbrush strokes. A lot of times people use the flat wash technique to create a background, so usually like a sky. So what you first have to do is wet your pan, or the colors that you're going to use. So this is the pan that I have. And I just put dabs of water in it just to moisten it up real quick. And what you want to do is use your lid, which is a great tool to use as a palette. You're going to dab your brush into the water and collect some paint. I'm going to be collecting blue right now. And you're just going to keep dabbing it into the water, back into the pan, and into the lid. And you want to create a nice puddle of color so you don't have to dip back into the paint pan when you're doing it. So, just gonna do that. Alright, so I think I have a nice puddle of watercolor in my lid. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, you're gonna soak up some of the paint in your brush. And you're going to make nice even strokes left to right on your paper, and you're going to move from top to bottom. So the reason you created the puddle of watercolor in your lid is so that you can get an even amount of water and color pigment. There. So here you have your finished flat wash. So your next technique is the variegated wash. And the variegated wash is pretty much a fade of one color into another, and it's using grading, which is like fading. So, and you're going to need a second color. So I'm going to make a pink. Mix some white into it. So what we're going to do for grading is the same technique used for the flat wash. So you're going to dip your brush into the watercolor, and you're going to make a stroke left to right. And then instead of dipping your brush back into the color, you're going to dip it into the water. That way you get a lighter stroke of color with less pigments in it. Then you're going to dip your brush into the water again and make another stroke. So as you can see, it just gets lighter and lighter. And then what you're going to do is flip your paper upside down so that you can make nice even strokes again, but you're going to use a different color. So I'm going to dip my brush into the pink that I made, and then start with the stroke left to right, dip it into the water, and then one more time. There. So as you can see that it blends a little bit in the middle. So the next technique I'm going to show you is the wet on wet. Basically what wet on wet is putting watercolor paint on top of an already wet surface. So what you're going to do is dip your paint into your water cup. Remember that the pigments of the colors float down to the bottom, so it's okay to dip your brush onto the top layer of the water cup. That way the water is most clear there. Then you're just going to make nice even strokes and wet the paper where you want it to be wet. So I covered my whole surface. Then what you're going to do is use whatever colors you want to paint on top. So a really fun technique is to drop little spots of color on here. So I'm going to start with the pink I made. And if you watch closely, when you drip that on there, it starts spreading out to the paper in the areas that's wet. Almost like a snowflake, you can see a lot of little lines moving outward. Then I'm going to use a different color just to keep showing you. Here's a spot of the blue. You can make fun shapes too. Then I'll show you the green. So what may happen when you do wet on wet is that you may see that the colors start to drip or run. Some people may want that, but if you don't want it, what you can do is always dab your brush dry and then go to the places where there's excess water and just leave your brush there and it will soak up the extra water, like that. So there's your wet into wet. The last technique I'm going to show you is glazing. And glazing is basically painting on top of a layer that's already painted. So what I want to start with is a flat wash. So I'll be using this pink color I have, and we're just going to do the regular flat wash technique that I already showed you. So slowly moving left to right and top to bottom. Alright, so what you want to do after you have your flat wash is you want to wait till it's completely dry. And how you know that it's completely dry is if it's no longer cool to the touch. Alright, so I'm back and my glazing paper is all dry. It's no longer cool to the touch. The reason why you want it to dry is so that when we done the wet on wet, you saw that the watercolor, when it touched the wet paper, it started spreading and dripping. We don't want that on glazing, so we're going to wait till it's completely dry. So what I'm going to do now is use the same color that I used as the flat wash, dip my brush into it, and just make another stroke. It doesn't matter if you do it straight or curvy. What you can also do is use a thinner brush if you want to make a design on top. So I'm using my smaller brush, using that color, I'm going to make a curvy line there. So what this does is make the flat wash color a bit darker. You can also use different colors if you want. So I'm going to be putting a little bit of my blue color on here too. So what's really cool about glazing is that the colors won't all blend together or drip, but instead it'll just be another layer on top of your flat wash. So this is the finished product of the glazing. As you can see, the part where I went over with the new paint is a bit darker. Just to go over the techniques we learned today, the first one was a flat wash. And it's just a basic background painting where you cannot see the brush strokes. Nice and even. The second one was the variegated wash, in which the two separate colors, they grade down or fade into the middle where they do blend. So if you look closely, you can see that it's a bit purple because the red and blue mixed. The next one we did was wet onto wet. Remember, this one was where we painted the paper first with water, so we made the paper wet, and then you dripped color onto it. And then it spreads and drips and makes really cool designs. The last one we did was glazing, which is where you watercolor paint on top of a flat wash. So I hope that was very informational for you and you were able to learn a lot from this. Thank you!